Hey, just a heads up that the following content may be disturbing or triggering for some listeners and is not appropriate for children. Please take care of yourself and others who may be listening with you. Welcome to the Bonus Babies Podcast, a show that has no easy answers, only hard questions.
We sued the state of Florida for improperly caring for a child. When you took a child away from their family for good reason at under a year, and at 18 they graduate after being in 40 or 50 placements with barely an education, unable to care for themselves, and mentally destroyed. I felt that was wrong, and we had to help him out financially for the rest of his life. Because at one point, he'd been a cute little baby who was very adoptable. He'd been a cute 3-year-old. He'd been a cute 5-year-old. There was no excuse for the way his case was managed.
Can you tell me what you call the kids who you've cared for over the years?
We feel that the children that we receive coming into our home are bonuses. So we call them bonus babies.
I love that. This is your host, Jayne Amelia Larson, and I'm a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate volunteer for youth in foster care. Yeah, I know it's a mouthful. In the same way a CASA works, I explore all things in the foster care maze by talking to kids, parents, caregivers, attorneys, social workers, therapists, really anybody and everybody who will speak to me to keep the conversation open and the information flowing about all things CASA.
Hi, this is Jake Eberly, the producer of the Bonus Babies podcast, and today, Jayne speaks with Gay Quarter. Now, Gay is a best-selling novelist, a filmmaker, and was a Guardian Ad Litem in Florida for over 25 years. And she wrote a book about her work called I Speak for This Child, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. She's also a great storyteller. So here's Gay.
Hello, I'm here with Gay Quarter. Hello.
Hi, Jane.
I'm so happy you're doing this from across the country, that you're working out all this tech. I guess I'm a little bit fed up about this. I wanted to make it easy for you, and then it never is. Oh, well. Okay, so can you tell me just who you are? How were you raised? What was your family of origin like? Just a little bit.
Well, this isn't going to be what you expect, Jane, because
I don't know. I don't know anything.
I was moved to Mount Vernon, New York, Westchester County as an infant. And my father immediately was in international trade. And he started taking the family, which at that time was just me and my mom, with him. And so the first stop was Taiwan, and we lived in Japan and various places all over the world, Brazil, Argentina. So I had a bit of a peripatetic youth. Sometimes we'd go back to our large home in New York for a few months or years, and then we might be off again. My mother finally insisted that I complete high school at home, so we stayed home while he did travel. And he was somewhat mysterious about what he was doing. And in fact, I'm writing a memoir, and I'm trying to get hold of the Freedom of Information file from the FBI about Dad. That's another story. So the few things I can say is, for instance, one day Dad came home and said, "Hey, I bought a boat." And my mother said, "You bought a boat without consulting with me?" And he said, "Yeah, but let me show you a picture of my boat." My mother said, "No, I don't want to see a picture of your damn boat." She said, we discuss things like that. He said, "Oh, come on. Let me show you the picture of the boat." And he unraveled a big scroll, and it was a aircraft carrier.
Wow.
And he bought it for Israel.
Oh my goodness.
But it never got to Israel, but that's another complicated story. But that's the sort of thing that went on in our household.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And that seems to be a theme for the rest of your life, right? That you have had amazing adventures, experiences, pursuits your whole life, right?
Right. I'm very adventuresome. I mean, we were always had to be ready to get up and go. And so travel is part of what we've done with our children and continue to do now. And I would say all my novels take place in different countries mostly,
Mm-hmm.
and have an interesting, usually a heroine who is up against the odds. One of them was a woman who was running the opium business in India in the late 1800s, which actually is based on a real person. Another was a woman from the Ukraine, from Kiev, who is based on my grandmother, who went to medical school there, even though Jews weren't supposed to do that. She had special permission and became a midwife, and then came to this country when her husband was running from the Tsar's officers that were after him for his communist leanings, and came to this country and became a midwife and was fighting against the doctors who wanted to run the obstetrical wards. And
Right. So what made you want to become a writer? Was it something you thought about when you were little?
I always knew it was one of those things that was pretty clear to me very early.
Mm-hmm. And then of course you have written many successful books.
Yeah,
I think you have millions of copies in print, right?
paperback and hardcover. Mhm.
And you've had some and some terrific bestsellers. And then also a very important part of your life has been your work as a guardian ad litem for over 25 years, right?
Right, I'm retired now, mostly because
Thank goodness. Thank goodness, right? I mean, how long can you go?
well, I gave it a good shot. I thought 25 years was a good cutoff, and also my hearing was a problem, especially high voices like children. And so if you can't
Yes.
really understand what the child is saying to you, that's a tremendous disadvantage because that relationship is speaking for the child. So it was time. That doesn't mean I'm not involved with children. I have 7 grandchildren, but I also am still involved with many of my old cases. They've become young adult friends.
Right, so how did you hear about the program, and what made you want to get involved in that way?
Well, this was in the early 80s. I read an article in Parade magazine, and I was always looking to do community service, but I found I was a horrible PTA member. I just wanted to tell them to stop the bake sales. It was cheaper just to give the money, and I wasn't a good team player. And so I was looking for things to do for the community, and I read about it, and I said, now that's something I could do, and I put the article away in a file. And about 3 months later, there was headlines in a local newspaper where a little boy had been in foster care and had gone for a weekend home with his parents, and his stepfather murdered him by dunking his head in a toilet when he soiled his pants. He was only 2 years old. And
Oh,
it said at the end of the article he was on a waiting list for a guardian. And I said, if I had acted 3 months ago, not that I would have ever gotten that case, but it just pushed me to immediately sign up, get the training, and do it.
mhm. And how do you feel about the work that you did?
Well, in our jurisdiction, which is somewhat rural Florida, over a 5-county area, our judges really respected and listened to us. And the guardians and CASAs have different roles in different states and different municipalities. We had a tremendous amount of power in ours. And everybody in the courtroom has an axe to grind. The Department of Welfare is there to serve a lot of children and not one child in particular. The lawyers are there for the parents defending their rights to be lousy parents. But there's nobody there whose sole interest is the child. And since we were complete volunteers, we couldn't be fired unless we did something really terrible. And we had nothing to gain or lose. So we were really impartial, and the judges did respect that. And one of the most influential things you could do was to write really good reports. And that was easy for me. I mean, some of mine had footnotes and references and psychological papers attached. And It was
Wow,
really
wow, so you really went all
I
out
did,
on them. Hmm.
I found I would do anything for a child on my caseload, things I would never ask for any member of my family. For instance, if my child needed penicillin and there was only one dose available, I'd fight like hell to get that dose. Well, I found I was doing the same for my child. They said there's only one bed in this institution where this child needs to be. I would make them insanely miserable until they gave my child the bed. And so, I got a reputation. I mean, I don't think the people in the court that I met liked me. I didn't do it to make friends, but I got things done. And that's why I kept doing it for so long because, okay, maybe I couldn't do a happily ever after, but I could at least get the kids' teeth fixed, or I could make sure they had a summer program they could go to, or they were in the right educational program.
Right, that's actually interesting what you just brought up because, of course, you can't fix everything. That's just not possible. But maybe you can get them the right medication. Maybe you can get them good schooling. Maybe you can get them into a better placement. And that is what we do. That's one thing I had to learn at the beginning as well as a CASA. There's no magic wand. You can't wave it and it all comes together. They're in the system because there's problems. And often those problems don't go away. Maybe they're ameliorated to some extent, but they don't go away.
Well, after a few years, I went to a CASA conference. I was trying to educate myself on everything that could be done. And I walked into a meeting room, and the topic was permanency. I had never really heard that word before. And again, this is more than 20 years ago. So there has been a lot of things that have evolved in child welfare. And they said, really, you're not giving a child anything until they have permanency. They know they're going to be okay in this family, whether it's a family of origin, a relative, an adoption. And it hit me pretty hard because my first case had been 3 siblings and involved sexual abuse. And in the file, the perpetrator, who was the father, had terminated his parental rights. He had signed away to do it. He signed away his rights, although it had not been ratified in court. And the mom was missing in action, although we knew how to find her eventually. And when the children became 18, I took one of them to dinner. And I said to her, "What could I have done to have been a better guardian? You were my first case." And she said, "You could have got me adopted."
Mm.
Now, she had never said that, and it had never occurred to me. I mean, who's going to adopt a 16, 17-year-old sexually abused girl?
Right.
Was my attitude. Now I would find that easy to do, or I wouldn't write that off. And her foster mom adored her and had adopted one of their children. So it could have easily been done. And somehow I had missed the main point. And after that, every child that came my way did achieve some form of permanency.
I never thought about it until I became a CASA. I never thought about permanency and the value of that and how every child so desperately needs and wants that, even if they are in an intact home, in a healthy and happy home. Every kid wants that consistency, that stability, that always knowing there's someone there for them, and I think a lot of people don't realize that that's one of the main things that youth in foster care, that's one of the main challenges. Sometimes they don't know where they're even gonna go that night. Their stuff gets put in a bag, and they get picked up at school, and they get shipped off to somewhere else with strangers again, and it happens over and over and over and over again. Before I became a CASA, I was like most people. I thought, "Oh, there's kids in care," but then they find a place and then it gets fixed. But we know that's just not the case. And, my hat's off to you for being able to do it for so long and for so many children, because I know there's a burnout for a lot of CASAs and guardian ad litems. It can be hard on the heart and the head, right?
Theoretically, but I always felt I could get some action done. And I stopped working with the system very early. I don't know what I thought. I was going to go in and be a helper to all these terribly busy and overworked social workers. And all I found was I was butting heads with them that they would say something was right for a child, and it made no sense to me at all. And I'd say, how is that good for this kid? For one boy kept moving every few days to different foster homes because as soon as he wanted a little more excitement in his life, he'd start smoking in the house, which was forbidden in all the foster homes, even though the foster parents and the social worker smoked.
Oh, God. That's just crazy.
So I said to the social worker who was sitting, smoking there, I said, the kid's 15. He smokes. It's not good for him, but none of this is good for him. Changing schools and foster homes every few days is much worse for him. And he's always threatening to run away. That's worse for him. Why don't we just find him a foster home where he can smoke? That was and that settled things for a little while. I'm not going to say that was the answer, but it seemed logical to me. Because the first thing a child does when they move into a home, they try and behave. That's a little honeymoon. They, testing it out, see what they have to learn new rules. They have to go to a new church or, a different lifestyle. Usually they have to change schools. And so while they're honeymooning, and then they get to the point where they kind of like it there. And then they say, well, what do I have to do to get thrown out? Let's see if this person who says she loves me and I'm a nice kid, let's see what I have to do. Because I'd rather find out now that they're going to throw me out when I really, really am comfortable here and it's going to hurt me to leave.
Right.
Because they build up this wall. So they start like this boy smoking, or they don't flush the toilet, or they hide out with a neighbor's house and they have to come looking for them, or they knock a vase down with their elbow, or they pinch the dog's ear, something. And they know darn well if there are birth children in that home, those kids aren't being thrown out anywhere. But usually they can press the foster parent's button and get thrown out. It's the rare foster parent who keeps them. So then they learn to trust nobody, and they get worse and worse behaviors as they go on. So unless you can find permanency, that isn't going to even work. And by the way, after they get adopted or they're in a permanent situation with their grandma in another state, they still pull the same thing because they don't believe. And so part of trying to train these people is say they're going to do some naughty things till they believe you're going to keep them.
Right. And what was your experience with the foster parents in general? How were they to you? Did you meet a lot of great ones, or were there awful ones, or was it a mix?
There were very, very few good ones.
Right.
Really, they did it for the money.
Right.
And they had all kinds of ways of justifying it. I met, some new ones that came with, very altruistic. They felt this was their calling. And very soon they're saying, well, really, we have these kids 24/7. We're only getting 30 cents an hour. And, they were taking money that was meant for the kids to have school supplies and putting it in their IRA accounts. And I found families that fed their birth children different menus than their foster kids. The foster kids got peanut butter sandwiches and their kids got hamburgers.
Wow.
They were few and far between. And usually the good ones were in it to foster and to adopt.
Yeah, they had an end goal that they really wanted to take care of a kid, and those are the ones would end up adopting, right?
So I really should jump in here and say that we did adopt a child ourselves.
Yes, you did. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's another story, but we did adopt our daughter Ashley when she was 12. She had not been a guardian child even in our county because that's a conflict of interest. And so we had to go to another city to find a child. And she was matched with us. We didn't go looking for the cutest, sweetest, whatever. It was a child. They said we had a lot to offer this particular child. The reason I wanted to bring her up now is that Permanency she had been in 14 placements in 9 years, including 2 institutions. And she had moved in the middle of the night. She'd been, as you said, a teacher. She went to school in the morning, and a foster family picked her up afterwards. And, she went to another home. She didn't get to say goodbye to her family, her friends, the pets, anything. And her foster parents, as she divulged about them, and we went back to look at them, several of them were later arrested as felons, as child abusers, as sexual perverts. I think she said 30% were really bad. One set was really evil, and they were later prosecuted because she wanted them prosecuted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now I'm the mom of somebody who lived it, and that gives me an entirely different perspective. I mean, she's a grown woman. She has 3 children, a lovely husband. She's a social worker, a motivational speaker, a best-selling writer. I'm very, very, very proud of her. But we went through a lot. And, you think I was prepared for what she would do, but boy, did she test us. I was her 13th mother. She was 12, and she hated my guts.
Mm-hmm.
And did everything she could to make me miserable.
Mm-hmm. Because she also did not want to be disappointed, right? She didn't want to be let down again.
Right.
Yeah, but you hung in there.
We did, and it was like being on a roller coaster and knowing I could stop this coaster if I threw her off.
Oh, wow.
But she was going to break her bones, and she was going, so I just had to hang on there because I couldn't injure her.
Wow. Wow. Wow, what an image. Oh.
But here we are. I would say we have 2 birth sons who are older, but I would say my daughter and I are the most emotionally close as any mother and daughter could ever be. We talk frequently about everything. She supports me. I support her. I never expected we have. Really, it's a relationship better than I had with my own mother.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think that's, of course, is the dream result. But it's very clear you worked very hard to make that happen. It's not like you just got lucky. You worked hard to make that happen.
No, and it was, he's written a book. It's called 3 Little Words, and her name is Ashley Rhodes Corder, and also 3 more words about her story. And it's not my story. I would write a different version of some of those events.
Sure.
We've actually been on the road talking, giving speeches together a few times, and I'd say that's not how I remember it.
No, I know. There's always your truth, my truth, and the truth in between, right? Or maybe there's even 6 or 7 different truths. So you also wrote a very important book about your work as a gal, I Speak for This Child, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Was that your first nomination for a Pulitzer? Because you've won many awards, but
well, that's about the best literary thing. But it was only a nomination.
Yeah, but that's a pretty great nomination. I mean, if you could think of one, that would be it, right? That's kind of fantastic. And I know that your book influenced a lot of people. When I first became a CASA, or I think even when I was thinking about it, Sid Gardner from Children and Family Futures, which is a foundation that works with issues of child welfare, he gave me your book. And I found it so moving and so enlightening, and also a little daunting, because you talk a lot about the cases and the difficulty of the cases. But what I was struck by is your determination and your perseverance, and also your consistent goodwill. You don't seem, and I don't hear it now either. You don't seem, you don't seem disappointed in humanity in spite of the many failings you've seen. Is that true?
It is, and it's very perceptive of you to pick that up. Because sometimes people would say, you went to prison to see this guy who did this terrible thing to a child. How could you stand being in the same room with him? My answer to all of that is, if you know somebody's story, you can't hate them.
Yes. Yes. Because they're human beings.
And we all have a story. And right now, there's a person in my community who is just doing awful things and saying terrible things about people who are LGBTQ plus and making headlines. And I would love to know his story, because while everybody's angry with him, I am sure he was an abused child.
You can smell it, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think you're probably right about that. It'd be interesting to find out, right? But I don't know if you.
And they do say that if you don't work to heal your wounds, you're going to be bleeding all over people who have had no part in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably true. You have been a very successful writer. You've done all this important community work. You've also had a lot of other kind of fascinating experiences with your husband. There's probably too many to name, but is there one that comes to mind right now that you'd like to talk about?
Well, being a guardian was volunteer work. Writing novels was my second career. And my main career has been being a film business with my husband since 1968.
That's right.
And actually, we were both in the film business in New York, and I hired him to come to work for our company. And the boss said, well, he wants the most money. And I said he was going to be worth it. So we've had a very, very close partnership, and we've done several hundred documentaries and corporate films, non-theatrical films. And we both developed an interest in adoption and foster care, juvenile crime at the same time. And so we've done a lot of films, which we call Change the World films, to show the best practices in child welfare and in courts and dependencies. And we've helped get laws changed regarding child welfare laws in certain states. We worked for many years with the Dave Thomas Foundation. And I think probably those films have had the most impact of anything we've been able to personally do.
Right. And how did you happen on that? Was that just something as a result of you two working together and realizing that you had these interests, but that you wanted to channel it into some kind of important social impact work? Because you could have just gone and made art films that would have been beautiful and maybe had interesting issues, but instead you chose to make films that had a more specific reach.
Well, there's always a story. I mean, we were doing educational films and small documentaries and television pieces. And what actually happened was I wrote the book, I Speak for This Child. I was on the road pushing the book, promoting it. I was in Columbus, Ohio, giving a speech. And a woman came up to me after the speech from the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. And she said, I really love your work. I know you're also a filmmaker. Can we talk about our foundation supporting some projects in the film world for you? So very often that, and then of course, a court judge organization said, "We saw your great film for the Dave Thomas Foundation. Would you do one for us to present to the attorneys generals of the United States?" Just this 50, 60 people. There's more because of the territories, to help influence them about what's going on in child welfare. So it was kind of handed to us. And, if you make a rye bread film advertisement, they want you to do the white bread film.
That's right. Right. It's just one thing leads to another, and
Right.
then you become the go-to person for that.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we knew what we were talking about, and they knew that they could say, "We want a film that has this point of view, and we have this much money," and we would talk about the issues. So they knew we knew the issues,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that they could trust us. And but I think over time, those were very influential in helping laws. I mean, they did a national law on the Adoption Safe Children's Act, and we were hired to do a film to explain the law to legislators, social workers, and judges. But guess what? We found out that legislators don't want to hear judges telling them what to do. And social workers don't want to hear legislators telling what to do. So we have the same visuals with narrations completely different for these different people. So they would listen and not shut it down.
Oh, so you had to figure out how to communicate and so that they could let it in.
Right.
Oh, that's remarkable. What could make
And you'll get this pretty easily. If you're watching a film where a doctor comes in and says the best treatment for breast cancer is this, and all patients should have this treatment, you're going to say, well, that can't be true. That's not necessarily the best one for me. But if you have a woman say, I had this treatment and it really worked for me, that's a whole different thing than a top-down approach. So you have to have peers talking to peers.
Right. And do you think your storytelling abilities influenced your CASA work, your gal work?
Probably. I think it made it possible for me to explain a case to a judge in a simple way, in a quick way. And there are very different points of view. A writer knows how to manipulate emotions. I wasn't
Really?
beyond. I wasn't
Really?
beyond using various communication skills to help a child. I mean, that's what we all do, right? We use what we have.
Yeah, you use what you have and also hone what you have. You get better and better at it. Once you figure out that something works, you feel, okay, I'm going to use that again, and I'm going to use it even in in a better way. And then in 2005, you and your husband actually received a congressional award, Angels in Adoption. So what was that for? I mean, I have an idea, but I want to hear from you.
Well, actually, I think our daughter got it too, because she was already, as a teenager in high school, she came to live with us when she was 12. She was already giving speeches about the importance of permanency and what it meant to her. So it was our local congresswoman had nominated the family for our work, and we went to Washington, and there was an event, and we got this lovely award, which we're very proud of.
But it sounds like you would have done all this without any kind of accolades.
Yeah, I mean, we've won a few Emmys, but in order to win an Emmy, you have to do all that paperwork. We
All
probably
that
could have
submission. That's
won
right.
more if we, entered more contests and things. There's so many rewards when you have a finished book and a finished film. It's like having a baby every time. Well, the award is getting a call from one of my former guardian kids to say she was thinking of me and thanking me because she wouldn't be where she is right now if I hadn't done what I had done years ago. And just out of the blue, getting that call or a note on Facebook, it's more likely, actually.
Yeah, that must be wonderful because you're in touch with a lot of the kids who you helped.
Yes, I am. And, I became more and more aggressive as time went on about what I would tolerate would happen to a kid. And I did find that there were cases when you had to sue everybody to get what you wanted. I had lawyers who would help, and we sued the state of Florida for improperly caring for a child. When you took a child away from their family for good reason at under a year, and at 18 they graduate after being in 40 or 50 placements with barely an education, unable to care for themselves, and mentally destroyed. I felt that that was wrong, and we had to help him out financially for the rest of his life. Because at one point, he'd been a cute little baby who was very adoptable. He'd been a cute 3-year-old. He'd been a cute 5-year-old. There was no excuse for the way his case was managed. There was another child I had who was given 8 different psychotropic drugs, and met him. He was in a corner drooling, and it took several years to get him off the meds, and that helped change the law in Florida because I had to get lawyers involved.
This is very important, very important. Okay, I want to be clear about this for everyone. So go back a little bit and explain this to me.
Okay, so this was a 6-year-old child who mother was mentally deficient and had been able to care for him properly, and he went to live with a cousin, but the mother had lots of pets, mostly dogs, and the child could bark like each of the different dogs, but he couldn't speak. And so he had all kinds of feral type behaviors, and it was too much for the cousin to handle. So she relinquished him to foster care. And he was a strange and difficult child. So they kept giving him a drug to slow him down, a drug to wake him up, and all these medications. And that's around the time I got the case. And I kept saying I wanted a second opinion. And they would take him to an adult psychiatrist who'd say he's fine. I say, no, I want him to have an expert child psychologist. Who is this child? Where did all these behaviors come from? And I had to hire a private lawyer pro bono to at least get the evaluations. And I arranged for him to go to Washington, D.C. to be at the National Children's Hospital and have a guardian there, courtesy, look at him. And my sister's a pediatrician in Washington, and she was going to oversee the case. And the department got angry that I had it all arranged. All they had to do was transport him, send a social worker with him to Washington. So they just said, oh, take him off all his drugs. That's what the guardian wants. But of course, you have to wean a child off drugs. So he had terrible, terrible reactions to that sudden withdrawal of the drugs and ended up in a psychiatric ward, and things got worse. In the end, though, when he was off all his drugs, he only had one problem. He was autistic. But you can't medicate autism. So we got him into a therapeutic place, and they worked with him very hard. When it came time to have him adopted, my husband used to donate his time and do these cute little adoption films about the kid. They did an adorable one about this boy, and he was adopted very quickly, and he's now in his 20s. He's still autistic, but he has a decent life. But with the important thing was the state of Florida changed the rules, and now, for instance, if you're a guardian, you have to list every month what medications a child takes and why, and the social workers have to do that, and they just can't get away with trying to drug sadness.
Right. And I've also seen that here in California, that kids are very often over-medicated just to make them compliant, just to make them easier to deal with. And actually, one of my very first run-ins as a CASA was with what I thought was a child very much over-medicated. And I had to fight to make that change. And that is part of our role. I didn't know I was going to have to fight so much. I've become a fighter too. I start sweet, but I usually end up fighting.
Well, I didn't expect to end up in contentious situations with almost every case.
Wow, Yeah.
I didn't expect that I would see everybody else's position as being so wrong.
Really? Yeah.
Um, but they were. I mean, they had very self-serving points of view, and they were not thinking of the child as the child is at that moment, and also the long-term arc of that child, and how do we get the best result for this child? And the recipes that they follow of what they're supposed to do not lead to healthy children. So I think the best thing that I did was thinking out of the box. For instance, a child was in pain. It was going to take 2 weeks to get a filling done, maybe longer under Medicaid.
Right. You write about
And
this in your book, actually, this
right.
particular
So
case,
I
right?
just
Yeah.
called my dentist and said, I got this kid, who's in pain. And I wouldn't call for my own kid, but there are plenty of dentists. Every dentist in this town would do a foster kid.
Right.
So it was just easier to make that phone call. I had another child who had been bitten on the cheek by a dog, and she was now 12, 13 years old and very, very self-conscious. And Medicaid refused to do cosmetic surgery, even though the psychiatrist recommended it. And it was just easier to find a plastic surgeon to donate his time.
Wow. Wow. So you just called in a bunch of favors too.
Right, and so in that case, the plastic surgeon said, "Of course, but the surgery center won't donate their time." So he got a quote for what that would be, and I thought, "Okay, I'll ask one of the service clubs in town, Rotary or somebody like that." And it just happened that our chief judge was in Rotary, and I passed her in the hallway, and I said, "Judge, would Rotary fund something like this?" And she said, "You tell me a little more. How much?" She said, "I'll let you know in a couple days." So that afternoon, she called me and said, "I have the money. Come pick it up."
Wow.
So
Wow.
the next morning, I went to the courthouse, and here was literally a brown paper bag filled with cash and checks. She had passed the hat in the courtroom. All these attorneys, everybody said, "We have this little project. We got to get this kid's face fixed." And
That's great.
but another way of thinking out of the box is looking at the laws on the books. And I found something, it's not called that, but I called it Nofault termination of parental rights. Normally, to terminate parental rights, you have to go to court. You have to prove that the parent is so bad they could never parent this child. Well, actually, that burden of proof is pretty high, because what if the mom eventually gets off drugs? What if the mom, and they wait years and years for mom or dad to get sober or get out of jail or do these things, and meanwhile the kid's life is dribbling away in difficult conditions. So I would go to the adopting family, and sometimes I had to find the adopting family. Not my job. People yelled at me, "You're not supposed to be an adoption counselor," but if I knew somebody who looked promising, I'd talk to them. And I'd go to the parent and I'd say, "Look, here's the situation. We can go to court in a couple months. Everything you've ever done is going to come out in public. It's a private hearing, but still, everything is going to be on record, and it's going to be an ugly situation, and it's not really helping your child. So why don't you agree to surrender the child to this family? You can meet the family, you can get to know them, and if you're sober and reasonable, you can have some ongoing connections with your child." And in the law, there was a way to set that up. And it just worked. I mean, I did 3 or 4 or 5 adoptions with kids with this friendly. And the very first one, the social worker said, "Look, if you ask this mom to terminate her rights and she wins the lottery, her children will not inherit." And I thought, now, what are the chances of that?
Yeah.
But here's what happened. The exact case where that was said the first time, the actual birth mother, who wasn't a bad person, she was mentally ill and couldn't handle the stresses of her life at that time. And she was in a car accident. It got a very big settlement. And her children, 3 girls, were teenagers. What's the first thing she did with her settlement? She bought each of them cars.
Aha. How did you feel about
Well,
that?
that story goes on in a beautiful way, because this is a small community. If the kids were in a band concert, she could go to the school and see the band concert. She could participate in their lives. I remember one of the teenagers got fed up with her adoptive home and got in her car and drove to see mom, stayed overnight and realized, ooh, that's why.
Ah, that's
You
why I
know,
was removed. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
but over the years, the birth mother, got really good mental health care. And she got away from abusive boyfriends and things. And now she's friendly with all her daughters, but one in particular has a child who's very, very physically, will never walk or talk. She has a genetic disease and probably won't live past the age of 8 or 10. And she, is in diapers and she requires all kinds of care. And guess who moved into the house to care for the baby?
Oh, the mom is
The
doing that,
birth
huh?
mom now is in her 70s. She's
Wow.
calm and she lives with the family. She's the one who takes care of the baby.
Yeah, see, that just goes to show, I believe in redemption. It doesn't always happen, but there is, I should say I believe in the possibility of it. And, so she's now the mom that she wasn't when she was younger, right?
Well, she still has problems. I mean, she's not the brightest thing, but she certainly can follow instructions and take care of this baby mostly needs somebody to hold her and love her and kiss her. She's
Mhm.
perfectly good at that. The
Mhm.
mom is not good at living alone, but her daughter is a very strong, wonderful woman with an excellent job. And she fits into their family. And now there's a new baby in the house as well. So they can use a grandma, and they shelter and take care of her too.
And what would you say now to somebody that was thinking about either being a gal, a casa gal, or a foster parent? What would you say to them?
There are 2 different roles, of course. But I think if you want to become a foster parent, you need to really check out your motives, and it's going to be very difficult. Assume you get a child, and it's a lovely child, and this child is in your house from the age of 2 to 4 or 5. You go through all these milestones with the child, and suddenly dad gets out of jail, and he has a right to get this child back. This child may never have met dad since he was an infant, and then you're going to take this child and put him with a felon and away from the only school he's known, the neighbors, the friends. He considers your other children his siblings, and you really have no legal recourse in that case. So it can be quite a heartbreak to be a foster parent. But if you feel that you could be that kind of parent, and you really can survive economically without that payment, and that payment is primarily for the extra needs of that child, then that would be a wonderful thing to do. If you're the kind of person who has good people skills or good writing skills or has an interest in really changing things, because depending on the jurisdiction, gals can have real power, then that might be a good role for you. You get tremendous support from the organizations and the courts. And I always say it's like being a big sister with clout.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
don't get emotionally involved. Don't take the children home, but you get to know them well, have relationships, and sometimes relationships are lifetime relationships, as it turns out, not that you started out that way. One of the best guardians I ever met was a waitress in town. So again, this is not something where you have to have a law degree or a lot of education. And she and I both had boys in the same foster home. And I'm a writer. I sit at my desk all day. I write. I'm a very cerebral person. And she's out there making sure the customers are getting what they want. She knows intuitively when they need their water fixed. She knows when they're waiting for a bill, and she can settle little problems. And we talk about this foster home, and I say, well, did you notice that this woman, the foster mom, do you really think she did this or that? And she said, oh, of course. And she'd go click, 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 click. She knew everything what was going on. She had much more sense of who this woman was, what she was doing, what her needs were. And I was just vaguely picking up signals when she had it all figured out. She understood how people work, and who to trust and not to trust, and who's going to tip and who's not, or whatever. But so if you have really good people skills, if you've been a teacher in the medical field, particularly, a lot of these kids have tremendous medical challenges, or you're just a good social person who knows people and connections. They need all kinds of guardians. And certainly we need men guardians. We need a diverse group of guardians, because many of these children are gay or lesbian or transgender or have questions, and we need people who can talk to them about what that was like. And we certainly need people of every single color and background.
These are all really important points because, as you know, I think even still the majority of volunteers in the National Gal CASA program are well-intentioned white ladies, and we need more men. We need more people of color. We need more diversity in general, and I hope people hearing out there will really get that we need more people looking out for the kids. The more we have, the more kids we can help, and the more varied we are, and those very variances are what can help different kids.
We had one guardian in our circuit here who lost his wife very suddenly, and he was grieving terribly. But he's already been a guardian with one case, and he just went into the office and says, give me every case you can. This is what I have to do. I just have to keep busy and thinking about other people and not myself.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And as you know, there's something about doing this work that just not focusing on yourself and your own problems and helping someone else is a terrific thing for both parties.
Right. I mean, I used to say I never felt a broken fingernail or, a sore thumb or anything. I mean, it's just when you're worried about other people at the level, I have relatives that would call me and say, oh, my little Gabe is having all these problems in school, and, what do you think I should do about it? And I basically laugh at them. I say, Gabe comes home to a mommy and a daddy and food and a cozy bed with clean sheets, and he never in his life has ever thought he's going to go somewhere else for any reason ever. So you just keep that up.
Right. Yeah, you just keep doing what you're doing. All right, so I want to ask you something I ask all my guests. What is the one thing that no one would know about you unless you told them?
Well, you might have surmised it, but I've always been a bit of a daredevil. Things like jumping out of airplanes. I'm not athletic. Yes. I'm very clumsy, but I'll take adventure trips, and I'll do something at the spur of the moment.
Yeah, so you like to take chances and just do fun, adventurous things.
Right.
Yeah,
and it usually works out okay, except the time my parachute didn't open.
Oh, what? What happened? What happened?
Well, I had to open the spare parachute.
Wow. So obviously you had correct training so that you opened the spare parachute and you didn't fall to your death.
Right, but the spare parachute didn't open as easily as it was supposed to. It was like bending over, and I was just dating my husband, and he said, I said, if you want to date me, you got to go parachute jumping. And so he's watching me come down, and there's no chute coming out. There's no chute coming out. And of course, so that was a long time ago. But we jumped once since then on our 25th wedding anniversary. So
Oh, wonderful.
we should have
Yeah.
done it for our 50th, but
All right, tell me about the cruise because I know you just wrote another book, and we are now just coming out of COVID, if we ever come out of it. So what happened with that?
well, we were on the infamous Diamond Princess, the famous ship that got stopped in Japan, and people were falling ill from COVID just a few weeks after the first cases had been announced in China. And it turned out that a man from Hong Kong had been in China briefly and before he got on our ship and managed to infect a lot of people. When he was feeling poorly, he got off actually in Hong Kong. He'd flown to Japan to take this trip for Chinese New Year's. But nobody knew he was sick for 5 days. And then finally it was reported to the cruise line and the country of Japan, and they quarantined our ship with thousands of people on board. And we woke up one morning and we're at a pier and we're seeing ambulances, military vehicles, fire vehicles. It was like we had just dropped in the middle of a B movie. It was so unbelievable. We couldn't comprehend what was going on. And nobody knew what this new disease was. It wasn't called COVID then. And people were getting sick on the ship. We were confined to our rooms, and yet every day, 10 people are sick, then 20, then 70, then 120. And we had no idea, where's it coming from? I mean, is it seeping through the air conditioning ducts? I mean, we weren't seeing any other people. So it was really frightening, and especially the numbers were that the older you were, the more likely you were to die. And we were in our 70s, and I had some conditions that also made it more severe. And we were talking to each other about, is this how we're going to die? And what do we do if one of us goes to the hospital and we've never been separated before? And
Oh my gosh. Gosh, it's awful.
And so we very meticulously decided we were going to tell the world what was going on and appeal to our country to come and get us. And we were traveling with friends, and they were appalled. They thought we should, shut up and not make waves. But being media people, we felt quite differently. We didn't have much equipment. We didn't have our professional equipment. We had iPhones, a little small movie camera, iPads, but we did have our own Wi-Fi transmitter, and called some media friends. And, actually I texted this guy at ABC News I knew. I said, "Hey, John, guess where we are? We're on the Diamond Princess." And he said, "Can I pass that message along?" And within an hour or two, we were on Good Morning America.
Wow.
And then we had the whole world press asking. In fact, our son in Boston took it over because, you have 24-hour coverage around the globe, and he couldn't handle it. So he turned it over to a friend of his who was in the PR business, and she put a staff on it. And we just did media nonstop.
So all those reports that we saw were probably coming from you
A lot of them were.
Yeah.
And if you just Google my name and coronavirus or those dates, it's all over the news.
Mhm.
And it worked. We do know it worked.
And you survived.
Yes, we didn't get sick either. Yeah.
Wow.
And that was because we were getting very good health information as well. And we were told it could be coming through the ducts. So we duct taped the ducts. We carry duct tape like good filmmakers. And
so you Hollywooded the ducks.
Right.
Wow.
We did the duct tape, and suitcases break. Duct tape comes in very handy, and it was cold. It was winter, but we left the doors open and we wore all our sweaters, and we took all the medication we had in our emergency bag. I'm very good at carrying a pharmacy, and I took everything like Tamiflu and whatever anybody else had an idea to take. And so far, we haven't gotten COVID, and we're first in line for vaccines, but it was the scariest. Well, it was the second scariest time of my life.
Well, yeah, because you were also in a plane crash, right?
Right?
So,
You know
I
too
mean,
much.
so was it what was it, the second or the third? Are there more? Okay, all right, just tell me about the plane crash. Then, I mean,
Okay,
I have
we'll
to hear
finish
it.
with the
Okay.
plane crash. Well, we had our own
Okay.
plane. We were flying from, Florida to New Jersey for our son's graduation from Princeton when we had a total engine failure near Trenton, and my brilliant, wonderful husband managed to land in a field.
He was the
He
pilot.
was the pilot,
Wow.
and, we stepped out into the field, ran out. Our younger son was in the back, and there was fuel leaking, but as it turned out, that had recently been plowed field, so the soil absorbed the gas. And we were hugging each other. And my husband said, I think we're meant to do something else on earth. That's why we're still here. And as we drove home from New Jersey to Florida, we talked about that. And by the time we got home, we knew what it was, and we started adoption classes.
So that led to the adoption of Ashley then.
Right. It makes a good story,
Wow.
but it's true.
I mean, you're just a remarkable woman. I'm sure you've heard that many, many, many times, but just an example of how you turn things around. You turn that death cruise around, and you turned a death crash around. And that launched a whole new life for Ashley, right?
Yeah, she's definitely the result of that. And
How do you feel about that, Gay? But I mean, has that ever been so plain to you, the way you turn stuff around?
I tend to think there's a lot of things that are meant to be.
You think that's destiny? You think that's destiny? Because that seems to me like action.
No, I'm not. I wish I could put it in another way. I think you said it actually best, that we just feel that when something is going wrong, we have within ourselves the ability to fix it. And we're not going to be passive and wait for somebody else to come along and fix it. If we're struggling financially, which we have many times in our life, we have to figure out a way to make some money. And, creative careers, you know what that's like.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
I mean, you became a driver.
Yeah, that's right. I was a chauffeur because I had to figure out a way to turn it around.
And that turned into
Yeah.
a book. And that turned into,
Yeah.
there's
Yep.
always another door.
I love that idea that you just need to look for the door. You look for the door and you head toward it, and hopefully it will open, or you kick it
You
open.
kick it open sometimes.
Yeah, right. Or or slide underneath it, get really skinny and slide underneath it and get through it or something, right?
And
Yeah. Or
if you're going for popularity and to be liked, I'm sure the people on the ship in Japan were not happy with our press releases.
yeah, but how smart that you did that. I mean, you probably saved your own life. I mean, no, I know, not probably, you did.
Well, with
Wow.
COVID, we can't say that. But actually, I'm writing a memoir, and the title is called Saving My Life.
Saving my life. Oh, that's perfect for you. That's perfect. Also, I like it because it's not just saving your life. You've saved many lives too.
Well, now that you mention it, and we don't have time for it, we actually did save somebody's life once, but that's another story.
No, you know what? You're a terrific storyteller. Let's hear it.
Well, let me think of a simple way to do this. We had very close friends from France who lived on a sailboat and traveled around making films, writing books, and also chartering their sailboat for money. And in the summers, they had to go back to France to help with the family pharmacy business. And they'd leave their boat here. And as a thank you to us, we'd join them in the Caribbean or wherever they were for family sales and that kind of thing. Well, our younger son, was in college, and he was studying to become a filmmaker. And he wanted to go with them on an expedition to Haiti to make a film on a little island where it's very primitive living and no cars and just and it was a combination with an anthropology project. So he flew down with a friend and spent they had Jan term there. And when that was over, he came back. And after he'd been home a few days, we got a call from a friend of ours on this island in the Turks and Caicos that said the captain of the ship, our friend, had just died suddenly, and nobody knew what was wrong. And his wife had the same symptoms, but she was about 24 hours behind him. And so she's in the Turks and Caicos, we're in Florida, and we got on the phone. And we also had our son and his friend who had been exposed to whatever this was. And what was it? Was it Ebola? There were workers who'd come from Africa to do aid. And it was something that kills you quickly, that turns your skin yellow, has some liver situation with it. So we called some doctors we knew, and they said she probably needs a liver transplant. We got to get her here and into a liver transplant program immediately. And we can sustain her on hold, till we can get a liver. And so we made phone calls. Pulled in every card we've ever had. First of all, we had to come up with $250,000 for her to be admitted to the program. And we don't happen to have $250,000 lying around, but we just called our broker and said, just put our kids' college funds, everything you have on margin. I need a check for that to be sent to the university immediately. Life or death, because they didn't even want to put me on the phone with this guy at 7 a.m. I said, life or death. And we called the Coast Guard, we called immigration, the health departments, the airplane that was going to go rescue her. And it was life or death. Don't tell me you can't get an agent to Gainesville because it's not an immigration port. Send one from Jacksonville. And we just used every skill, every card we knew, including we knew somebody at the CDC whose wife worked there. Blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, we'll get it all set for this woman to come to Florida, but we didn't know what was wrong with her. And so we also put my sister who's a doctor, on the case of the boys at college. And she called them and come in for tests and try and figure out what was on. And we had seen their footage. And I remember they had wanted to interview with the mayor of this island, but they couldn't interview him because he had a relapse of malaria. So we discussed with our son what kind of malaria and do they have medications. And I had forced my son and his friend to take malaria pills with them because I'm that kind of a mother. And I said, did the French family take their malaria pills? He said, no, they go there all the time and they get headaches from the pills. So then I called the CDC and I told everybody about the yellow and the symptoms. I said, could it be malaria? And they said, it's probably malaria. Once we had a lot of information. And so Phil and I get in a car and we're driving to meet the helicopter that's bringing her from the airport to the medical center. And it's the first time I ever saw people in hazmat suits, like the COVID suits, the Ebola. It's the first time everybody's in the law because they're expecting somebody with a tropical disease, an unknown tropical disease. And I run into the room and say, you can't come here. You can't come in here. I said, oh, yes, I can. I just paid $250,000 to walk in here.
Wow.
I mean, this is my guardian stuff. And I said, but it's not about that. Do a malaria test, stat. Do a malaria test, stat. And they're looking at me like I'm crazy lady. I was a crazy lady. And I started saying, I talked to the CDC. There's this. The mayor had malaria, blah, blah. And I said, it's going to take you 5 minutes to do a malaria test. So they said, the doctor who was in charge of the liver transplant program went, all right, humor her. And she had malaria, but she had a very rare form called falciparum malaria, which you can die from in 4 or 5 days. The red blood cells take over your blood. And I don't know the exact number, but it was something like if it was over 10, you were going to die. And she was at 11.
Wow.
So they
Wow.
immediately started to transfuse her and change her blood and give her the correct medications, and they saved her life. And she was within hours of death.
So you saved her life. So,
But the Chinese say, and this turned out to be true, never do that. Never save a man's life, because then they feel beholden to you for the rest of their life, and you can't put that burden on someone. And we were at a wedding with this woman 10 years later, and she was still everybody in the wedding, her family all came and thanked us and thanked us and thanked us. I said, that's so long ago. That's.
But it didn't turn out badly, though. But she didn't turn against you. She just continues to thank
Oh,
you.
no, she's our closest friend.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no. And my husband can't tell the story because her husband was his best friend in the world. And he just burst into tears still 25 years later.
Oh, you're amazing. You're an amazing couple, Gay. I mean, you're.
Well, I did win the lottery when it came to husbands.
Oh, that's nice to hear. That's good. And hopefully I'll get a chance to meet him too, or even talk to him.
I'm going to give everybody the secret of happiness for 54 years.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. He did it for 3 or 4 years before I caught on. But when I finally caught on, it's called competitive niceness.
Ooh.
And so, he brought me a cup of tea in bed in the morning. And when I'm out, I stop and pick up the dry cleaning just because it's on my way and I don't want to have to him bother. And, I'm on a long phone call, so he does all the dishes. And it's like, what can I do to make her happier that she's making me? And it works. It works.
It works because you continue to do nice things for each other over and over and over again.
Right. And we try a little one-upmanship.
And it's a little competitive. Yeah.
Right.
But I think that's healthy competition. I think that's good competition. Yeah. So thank you again, really. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for working so hard on all the tech aspects. And I appreciate you very much.
Thanks, Jayne. And especially thanks for all the awesome work you're doing for our children.
Thank you, Gay, for all of your insight and your incredible stories. It's truly a pleasure to have you on our show. So for next week, it's spring, and we've decided to take a spring cleaning break, and we'll be back very soon. If you subscribe, you'll get a notification for the next episode. If not, check in next week. All the best. Have a great holiday. Be well. If you see something, say something. If you suspect a child's health or safety is jeopardized in any way by parents or anyone else, contact the Child Protective Services Agency in your county. 24-hour hotlines are staffed by trained social workers who will help you through the process, and you can do so anonymously. In California, you can call the Child Protection Hotline at 800-540-4000. So if you see something, say something. You might be saving a child's life. If you want to know more about becoming a CASA anywhere in the country, go to nationalcasagal.org, and in LA, casala.org. And if you want to know more about becoming a foster parent, check out the National Foster Parent Association at nfponline.org. There's also faithfosterfamilies.org and adoptuskids.org. There's tons of other information online as well, so you can just hunt around. We also want to thank the supremely talented Christina Apostolopoulos for her beautiful original music. You can find her music on Spotify or Instagram at Christina Aposta. And also thank you to Yukon Har for his engineering. Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear and you find it as valuable as we do, please rate us and hit subscribe. You can also make a donation at bonusbabies.org. See you next time.